In the frozen silence of a battlefield abandoned by war, a human medic stumbles upon an enemy creature left to die, a massive alien beast built for destruction. But instead of finishing the job, he chooses compassion, and what follows is a story that will challenge everything you thought you knew about loyalty, redemption, and the true meaning of partnership. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and show some love with a thumbs up by liking the video. Now, let's dive into this unforgettable journey. The sky above Vestra hung heavy with ash and smoke. Once a green and living world, the planet was now just a graveyard of war. Broken machines, scorched trees, and shattered weapons were all that remained. Fires flickered weakly across the ruined landscape, casting an eerie glow over the twisted remains of what had once been a beautiful place. The battle had ended, but nothing felt finished. Silence had taken over, but it wasn't peaceful. It was the kind of silence that came after screams and gunfire, thick with the weight of everything lost. Nolan Bryce stepped carefully across the wreckage. His boots crunched softly in the layer of ash that coated the ground. He was a medic, trained to move slowly, to listen, to find any flicker of life left in the ruins. His scanner beeped in slow pulses, guiding him across the field like a tired heartbeat. Nolan had seen many battlefields, but something about Vestra felt worse. The planet itself seemed to mourn. The trees were blackened bones. The rivers were choked with rubble. And here and there the broken bodies of soldiers, both human and alien, lay still, marked by the chaos of the fight. As Nolan moved around a collapsed warship, something strange flickered on his scanner. A reading too large to be human, but alive. Frowning, he raised his blaster just in case. His training told him to be careful. The Thren, the alien force they'd fought here, had bred living weapons, beasts made to hunt and kill. The creature this scanner had found could be one of them. It could be wounded, or it could be waiting. He stepped around the twisted hull and stopped. Lying half-buried beneath a jagged piece of ship plating was a massive shape. At first it was hard to tell what he was looking at. Fur, armor, scales, blood. The creature looked like something between a wolf and a tank. Its body was thick with muscle, its hide marked with ridges and plates like natural armor. One of its flanks had been torn open in the battle, and thick, dark blood seeped into the dirt. Its breathing was rough, shallow, almost wheezing. Yet somehow, it was alive. Nolan didn't move at first. This was a Thren scout beast. He'd seen one from a distance once during a briefing. They called them Kalen. Fast, strong, nearly impossible to stop. He had heard they could tear through armored vehicles, like paper. Most human soldiers were taught to kill them on sight if they even got the chance. But now, face to face with one in this state, Nolan saw something different. The creature's eyes opened slightly, just a sliver, and they met his. Nolan expected rage, fear, or even defiance. Instead, he saw pain, not the wild kind, just quiet pain. The kind that comes at the end. The kind that says, "I don't expect to be saved." For a long moment, neither of them moved. The scanner beeped again. A soft wind carried the smell of scorched grass. Nolan slowly lowered his blaster. He was trained to help the dying. That had always come first. Even if the body lying there had been built to kill, he stepped closer, slowly. "It's okay," he said, unsure if the creature could understand. His voice was low, gentle. "I'm not here to hurt you." The beast's ears twitched. A soft, weak sound came from its throat. It sounded almost like a whimper. Something inside Nolan shifted. He knelt beside the creature and opened his field kit. The wound was bad, deep, ragged, still bleeding. No armor could have saved against whatever did this. He worked quickly but carefully, spraying sealant into the open gash, attaching a coagulant patch to slow the bleeding. He injected a pain relief, serum along one side of the ribbed spine. The creature growled low in its chest, but it didn't snap or lunge. It didn't even try. It just watched him with tired eyes and let him work. When Nolan finished, he sat back on his heels and exhaled. "There," he said softly. "That should hold, at least for now." The Kaelin didn't respond with words. Of course it didn't, but its breathing had slowed and its eyes followed Nolan with something that felt almost like trust. He tapped his communicator. "Medical unit, this is Bryce," he said. "I've got a wounded non-human here, large, Thren bioform, breathing, stabilized." Static buzzed for a second. Then a voice crackled through. "Say, again? Did you say a Thren unit?" Nolan didn't hesitate. "Yes, it's alive, and I'm not leaving it here." Silence. Then finally, "Copy that. Sending a heavy lift evac now." Nolan looked back at the creature. It was resting again, though one eye remained open, watching. Maybe it was waiting for death. Maybe it was confused about the help it had just been given. Nolan didn't know. But what he did know was that this creature, this thing bred for war, had been left behind. Abandoned. Left to die slowly under broken steel and broken skies. And that wasn't something he could just walk away from. He reached out and placed a hand gently on the beast's armored shoulder. It was warm and steady, beneath his fingers. "You're not done yet," he said. "Not if I have anything to say about it." In the distance, the faint whine of an incoming shuttle began to rise. The hum of the medical station echoed softly as Nolan paced outside the infirmary bay. Just hours ago, he had been standing on a broken world beside a dying alien. Now, he was inside a pristine orbital facility with bright lights, clean air, and the heavy weight of curiosity pressing down on him. Inside the bay behind reinforced glass, Kaelin lay stretched on a large treatment table designed for transport haulers, not living beings. His body was still, the wound on his flank freshly cleaned and sealed. Machines beeped around him. A drip fed him fluids. Monitors tracked every breath. Nolan hadn't left his side since the evac team had lifted them both from Vestra. The crew had stared. Some had even refused to help until their commander ordered them to follow protocol. Nolan could feel the tension in the air. The idea of treating a Thren war beast, a creature bred for destruction, wasn't just strange. To most of the station staff, it was dangerous. Unthinkable. But none of that mattered to Nolan. All he saw was a life worth saving. Dr. Lena Torres stepped up beside him, arms crossed, her face hard to read. She was in her late 40s with streaks of silver in her hair and sharp eyes that rarely blinked. Chief medical officer, years of experience, and known for being calm even under pressure. "That's a Kaelin," she said plainly, her voice even. "Thren-built. Bioengineered. Most of their kind are programmed to attack anything human." Nolan nodded. "I know." She looked at him for a moment, trying to decide whether he was brave or foolish. Maybe both. "You're sure it didn't try to harm you?" she asked. "Even when you treated it?" Nolan shook his head. No aggression, no movement to attack, just pain, just quiet. Dr. Torres turned her eyes back to the creature through the glass. Kaelin's chest rose and fell in slow rhythm. His eyes were closed now. "You've seen things I haven't," she said. "And you believe this one can be something else?" Nolan didn't hesitate. "I don't know what he's supposed to be, I just know what I saw." After a long pause, she gave a small nod. "We'll monitor him closely. No restraints unless necessary. But you're responsible for his behavior. While he's here," Nolan felt a strange mix of relief and responsibility settle in his chest. "Thank you," he said quietly. The next few days were a blur of updates, scans, and careful steps. Kaelin remained calm through it all. His wound had been deep, but not fatal. His body responded quickly to treatment, his natural healing boosted by the genetic modifications the Thren had given him. Every so often, he would open his eyes when Nolan came near. He would lift his head slightly, track Nolan's movements, and once, just once, he let out a low huff that sounded almost like a sigh. Nolan visited as often as he could. Between duties, he brought specialized meals approved by the xenobiology team. He sat near the enclosure, talking softly about things Kalen couldn't possibly understand. His childhood back on a quiet moon colony. His first years as a medic. The teammates he'd lost. Kalen didn't speak, but he listened. His ears would flick at Nolan's voice. His eyes would stay locked on him, calm and steady. On the 5th day, Nolan opened the access hatch and stepped inside for the first time without a medic team on standby. Kalen sat up slightly, his massive form slow but no longer weak. Nolan moved with care, keeping his hands where Kalen could see them. He knelt, held out a piece of nutrient gel, and waited. For a moment, Kalen did nothing. Then, he leaned forward, sniffed, and gently took it from Nolan's hand. There was no growl, no warning, just trust. A moment later, his tail gave a slow, small wag against the floor. Word spread quickly through the station. The war beast was not only recovering, he was responding. People peeked through windows. Some whispered, others asked questions. A few were still angry that he was even alive. But the tide was shifting, just slightly. Dr. Torres began to visit more often, reviewing Kalen's behavior. She noted his lack of aggression, his steady vitals, and the way he followed Nolan's movements with quiet attention. "He's not what we expected," she said during one check-in. "He's different." Nolan had already started simple commands: sit, stay, follow. He used gestures more than words. Kalen was quick to learn and quicker to obey when Nolan was near. There was no punishment, only patience, a pat on the neck, a small nod. And over time, Kalen responded, not out of programming but choice. One evening, Nolan arrived to find Kalen sitting up, waiting. The alien's amber eyes lit up at the sight of him. Nolan chuckled, walking over and kneeling again. "Hey, big guy," he said. "Look at you." Kalen made a low rumble deep in his chest, not threatening, content. Nolan reached out, rubbed behind one of Kalen's ears. The beast closed his eyes and leaned into the touch. In that moment, all the stories people told about Kalen war beasts faded. There was no monster here, just a creature who had been left behind and someone who had chosen not to walk away. Dr. Torres watched from the observation room. She didn't say anything at first. But when her assistant asked what she thought, she replied, "I think we're witnessing something rare. Something real." And from that moment on, Kalen was no longer a patient. He was Nolan's partner. The frost-covered planet of Marine looked like a pearl wrapped in storms. High above the surface, snow swirled through endless white skies, and jagged cliffs cut through frozen clouds like knives. The world was cold, sharp, and silent. Somewhere down there, a civilian transport ship had crashed 3 hours ago. No contact, no location signal, just a broken emergency ping buried beneath layers of ice. The rescue teams were stretched thin, and the environment was too harsh for drones or most equipment. That was why Nolan and Kalen had been called. Inside, the landing shuttle. Nolan checked his thermal gear again. His fingers moved out of habit. Glove seals, comms, oxygen link. Everything had to work perfectly on Marine. One wrong step could freeze a man solid. Across from him sat Kalen, his massive form wrapped in a special heat-shielded harness. His breath steamed from his nostrils, slow and even. Nolan reached out and gave his shoulder a gentle tap. "You ready?" he asked. Kalen turned his head and gave a quiet grunt, the kind that meant yes. In his own way, he always answered. Commander Thorin Rusk stood near the cockpit, arms folded, watching them both. He was a tough man, known for his sharp words and colder stares. He hadn't been pleased when Command approved a bioform for a live rescue mission. "I don't care if it plays fetch and sings lullabies," Rusk had said before takeoff. "If it becomes a threat, it goes down." Nolan had ignored the warning. He'd heard it before. He also knew Kalen had saved lives. Quietly, without praise. That was enough. The shuttle landed with a thud that shook the floor. Wind screamed outside as the hatch opened, sending a blast of cold air into the cabin. Nolan pulled down his goggles, adjusted his mask, and stepped out onto the ice. Kalen followed, leaping down easily despite the snow, his thick limbs making deep tracks. The wind was so loud it was hard to think. Visibility was almost zero. The world had turned white. Nolan tapped his wrist pad. The signal was weak, but it was there, somewhere east. "Let's move," he said, and the two of them pushed forward into the blizzard. For hours, they walked, climbed, and searched. Kalen's nose stayed low to the snow, sniffing carefully. His ears twitched at every sound. Broken echoes, shifting wind, the creak of ice. Nolan trusted him completely now. In this place, technology could fail, but Kalen's instincts wouldn't. Nolan had seen him in the medical bay, soft and still. Now he was something else entirely. Focused, alert, powerful. Suddenly, Kalen stopped. He let out a short, sharp bark. Nolan froze. That sound was one they had practiced. A sign he had found something. Nolan followed Kalen's gaze to a snow, drift shaped strangely, almost like it had been pushed out from the inside. Kalen began digging, fast and strong. His claws tore through the ice, sending flakes flying in every direction. Beneath the drift, metal gleamed. It was the hull of the crashed ship. Nolan's heart jumped. He tapped his comm. "This is Bryce. We've found the wreck. Coordinates coming now. Survivor's status unknown." Kalen kept digging, and soon they reached the emergency door. It was bent but still sealed. Nolan pulled out a thermal torch and began cutting. Inside, it was dark and freezing. The air was thin. Huddled in one corner, wrapped in survival blankets, were 6 people, 3 adults and 3 children. Their faces were pale, eyes dull. Hypothermia had set in, but they were alive. Kalen stepped inside slowly, lowering his head. One of the children shrank back, eyes wide with fear. Nolan stepped in between. "It's okay," he said gently. "He's with me." Kalen didn't move. He sat down, lowered his head, and waited. After a moment, one of the older survivors, an engineer by his uniform, nodded slowly. "You brought a Kalen," he said, disbelief clear in his voice. "They said they were monsters." Nolan looked back at Kalen. They were wrong. The rescue team arrived 20 minutes later with stretchers, medkits, and heated shelters. Nolan and Kalen helped carry the survivors out one by one. Kalen took extra care with the children, using his back like a sled to slide them safely across the ice. Even Commander Rusk, who had arrived with the crew, said nothing for a while. He just watched, his expression unreadable. As the last survivor was loaded onto the shuttle, Rusk approached Nolan. "I've never seen anything like that," he said quietly. He didn't hesitate, not once. Nolan gave a small smile. He never does. Back on board, Kalen lay quietly in the cargo area, his body steaming from the cold. One of the children came over and placed a hand on his paw. Kalen didn't move, just gave a soft rumble and closed his eyes. Nolan watched the scene and felt something settle in his chest. Something warm. Kalen had once been designed to hunt, to destroy, to follow orders without thought. But here he was wrapped in blankets and silence, a child resting against him like he was a guardian. The frost had hidden life. Kalen had uncovered it, and in doing so, he had revealed something even more powerful. Proof that even in the coldest places, something warm can still survive. The stars outside the medical station shimmered softly as the shuttle docked, its engines purring to a stop. Inside, the rescued civilians from Marine were being wheeled out, wrapped in blankets and carried by teams of medics. But all eyes weren't on them. They were on the large figure that stepped off the shuttle just behind. Nolan Bryce, Kalen, the Threnborn beast who had become something much more. His heavy steps echoed through the station halls, but no one moved to stop him. Not this time, not after what he'd done. News of the Marine rescue had spread faster than anyone expected. The footage of Kalen pulling children from wreckage, shielding survivors from freezing winds and calmly sitting while people clung to him, had been seen across multiple systems. Soldiers who once called him a monster now called him a miracle. Engineers wanted to study him. Scientists wanted to understand him. But Nolan had made one thing clear. Kalen wasn't a subject. He was a partner. Within hours of their return, Nolan was called to a high-level meeting. Commander Thorin Rusk stood outside the door waiting. Gone was the man who once warned that Kalen should be put down if he showed even the slightest threat. Now Rusk simply nodded. "They want to talk," he said, "and they're listening." Inside the conference room, Director Senya Mayer sat at the head of the table. She was the highest-ranking civilian official in the sector, known for her strict judgment and dislike of unnecessary risks. Around her sat military leaders, doctors, and station officers, all watching Nolan closely. Behind him, Kalen waited silently, seated but alert. Senya cleared her throat. "We've reviewed the reports, we've seen the footage, and frankly, I'm not sure what to do with this." She leaned forward. This Kalen, he was made by our enemies, built to kill. And now he's carrying children like a rescue dog." Her voice was skeptical, but her eyes held something else. Curiosity. Nolan stood firm. Kalen was made for war, yes, but he chose something different. No one trained him to be gentle. No one programmed him to sit still while a scared child held his paw. He did that because he wanted to. That matters. There was silence in the room for a moment. Dr. Lena Torres, sitting nearby, finally spoke. "He's more than a weapon. He's proof that even those designed for violence can be something else. Something better." Senya looked at Kalen, who remained calm under her gaze. Then she nodded, slowly. "We want to try something. A program. A trial team of human Kalen pairs. Rescue missions. Disaster relief, peacekeeping, you'll lead it." Nolan's heart skipped. "You mean it?" "I do," Senya said. "But it won't be easy. There are people who still see Kalen as a threat. You'll face protests, resistance, you'll need to prove yourselves again and again. Are you ready for that?" Nolan didn't hesitate. "We've already started." And so it began. The project was called the Vestra Pact, named after the planet where Nolan had first found Kalen buried in the ruins of war. At first it was small, just Nolan, Kalen, and a handful of new recruits. They trained every day, not in combat, but in rescue, tunneling through debris, detecting heartbeats beneath rubble, guiding scared survivors to safety. Kalen taught the other Kalens by example. They followed him not out of fear, but respect. Their first major mission came only weeks later. A colony on the edge of Allied space had suffered a series of quakes and floods. Hundreds were missing. As Nolan and Kalen arrived, they were met with fear and suspicion. Protesters held signs warning of monsters. But they didn't turn back. They went to work. Day after day, Kalen and the team dug, searched, and pulled people from the ruins. Slowly, the fear faded. A child hugged Kalen's leg. A farmer brought him food. The same people who had shouted in anger now stood in silence, watching him move through their shattered homes with care and purpose. By the time the mission ended, the protests were gone. In their place stood crowds with banners that read, "Thank you." Nolan and Kalen walked through the square side by side. A small girl ran up and handed Kalen a flower. He sniffed it, sneezed, and gently tucked it into the strap of his gear. Months passed. More missions followed. More hearts changed. And everywhere they went, Nolan told their story. Not the story of a soldier and his beast, but of two souls who found each other in the wreckage and chose to build something better. Years later, a monument was placed on Vestra, right where Nolan had found Kalen half buried under the metal ruins of war. It wasn't large or grand, just a stone with a simple inscription. Here, one saw a weapon, one saw a friend, and the stars were never the same again. Kalen stood beside Nolan as they looked at it, both older, both worn by time and duty. Nolan reached out and touched the stone. "We did it," he said softly. Kalen let out a quiet rumble, resting his head against Nolan's shoulder. Above them, The stars continued to shine, not with fire, but with hope.